Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Welcome back to our 5-minute Bible study series. Yes, we are starting up again. I've been on about a 1-month break. Not technically a break for me. I've been working on getting the hard copy books out. And if you're not aware and you haven't seen the last video, the first 5 books of the Bible are now out. They're available. You can purchase them on Amazon if you want to. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the other ones will be coming very shortly. I have also... we'll try it out. I've designed a new schedule kind of for how I want to release these videos and how I want to work on them. And so hopefully the new books will come out progressively as we move through these studies in a little bit more timely way. It's just hard to balance all of that. So anyway, if you want those books, I know many of you have been waiting for them. Thank you for your patience, and they are now available. Today we are starting 2 Samuel chapter 1. 2 Samuel, well, I guess we'll get into that introduction stuff as we move into our outline section. So let's go ahead and jump into our regularly scheduled programming and talk about when these events happened, the main characters of the chapter, where the events happened, our outline, and then, of course, our application. If this is your first time with us, welcome. The PDFs that you see up on the screen, you can get them for free and download them on our website at tobelikechrist.com. There's a link down in the description. If this is your 200th time with us, welcome back. You already know the drill. Okay, let's jump into 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 1, when did these events happen? I've got here that King Saul, he died in approximately 1055 BC after reigning over Israel for about 40 years. Now, if you remember from about a month ago when we finished 1 Samuel, notice we went back in time like 50 years. I had Saul's death dated closer to 1000 BC. Now, why is that? Well, I think I just messed it up, to be honest with you. I think I was missing some important pieces of information, and I got those dates wrong. So we've had to roll it back a little bit, and I think now our dates are good, hopefully. What was I going to say? I'm going to have to go back and do some edits, I think, on the Judges and 1 Samuel PDFs. So I'm going to be rolling those out. I think the rest of the dates, though, are good. Everything else still lines up, but I think I had to shift this a little bit, and I think it's right now. But as I always say, these are approximate dates. There's a lot of debate about when these things happen, shifting, a couple years here and there. Now we jump down to our second section, and we're probably already at 5 minutes. The first video is always longer. But let's take a look at our characters. Who are our main characters in chapter 1? First, we've got David. Been talking about him a lot. David was the future second king over all of Israel and all of Judah. He had been living amongst the Philistines at Ziklag to avoid Saul for quite a while. Saul had attempted to kill him several times, so he's hiding out with the Philistines at Ziklag. And then we have Saul. Saul is the first king of Israel. He ruled over Israel for about 40 years, which we mentioned before he was killed by the Philistines in the very last chapter of 1 Samuel. That was our last video. Jonathan was David's best friend, and he was the son of Saul. He was also killed in 1 Samuel chapter 31. And then in this chapter we have an Amalekite man who we're going to mention. This was a young Amalekite man who brought the news of Saul's death to David at the battlefield. Where did these events take place? Well, David was living at Ziklag, which we mentioned that's in the territory of Judah. You'll see on the map just to the left of the Dead Sea, closer actually to the Mediterranean Sea. Saul and his sons were killed at a battle at Mount Gilboa. Mount Gilboa is to the southwest of the Sea of Galilee, quite a bit more north than Ziklag. You'll see it there by Jezreel, by Endor, by Bethshan. Now let's jump into our outline, do a very quick introduction section. 2 Samuel is just a continuation of the history that we've been talking about in 1 Samuel, right? It just keeps on rolling. So don't think that moving into 2 Samuel, the storyline is going to be significantly different or all the characters are going to change. No, we're just continuing on with the story of Saul, of David becoming king. The last chapter of 1 Samuel recorded the death of King Saul. So the era of Saul is kind of over, and we're moving into the era of David. The first chapter of this book returns to David's story. right after he had saved his family from being kidnapped by the Amalekites. You remember that story from 1 Samuel chapter 30? David and his men were up with the Philistine army. Meanwhile, the Amalekites went to Ziklag and kidnapped his family, and then David had to go save his family from the Amalekites. So that story has just finished up. He's now saved his family. He's back in Ziklag. That's where we're picking up. I've got two sections in this chapter. Verses 1 through 16 is the first section. The death of Saul is reported to David. So after saving his family from being kidnapped, David stayed at his home in Ziklag for 2 days. And on the third day, a young man from Saul's camp came to him in the city and reported the results of the battle between the Israelites and the Philistines at Mount Gilboa. He told David that Saul and his sons had been killed, and that he had actually personally assisted Saul in killing himself after he had been mortally wounded on the battlefield. Now, this is interesting because these details of this Amalekite helping Saul to kill himself aren't recorded in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel. So there's some question, is he being totally honest here? Is he just trying to earn David's favor by saying that he got rid of the old king now, so David can now be king? We don't know. The details aren't included, but there did seem to be some credibility to the young man's story because he was actually in possession of Saul's crown and his armlet, and he gave these things to David, obviously signifying that he's next in line. David was really upset about this. He never wished for Saul's death. He had several occasions to kill Saul that he passed up on because Saul was the Lord's anointed, and he didn't feel like he had the right to take his life. So David was sorrowful. He tore his clothes. All of his men wept for Saul, for Jonathan, for the rest of Saul's sons, and for the men of Israel that had been killed during the battle. David was actually angry with this young man who reported Saul's death, and he considered it a great evil that this Amalekite man had felt he was even in a position to finish Saul off, even though Saul, he basically said, look, Saul wasn't walking away from this battle. He was mortally wounded. He was going to die on the battlefield. I just kind of finished him off. David thought this was a great evil, and so he actually had the young man executed because he had done damage. He had killed the Lord's anointed. Interesting. A lot of questions about that. We'll deal with that in our application section. Now, on to section number 2. David's lament for Saul and Jonathan. This is verses 17 through 27. David wrote a lament about Saul and about Jonathan, and he taught it to the people of Judah. And I want to highlight a couple sections from this lament. He lamented the mighty men of Israel who had fallen in battle. Quote, "Your glory, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen." He spoke fondly of Saul and Jonathan and their father-son relationship. Quote, "Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions." And then finally he expresses his sorrow about losing his best friend. Quote, "I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women." So that is 2 Samuel chapter 1. Again, we're moving from the era of Saul into the era of David as king. And now finally for our application. This is important to keep in mind as we go through really the rest of the Old Testament. God doesn't always express his approval or disapproval of events that are recorded in the Old Testament. And if you're like me, you came to this section about David killing this Amalekite for helping Saul to finish himself off, and you're like, well, how David has this young man executed for this? It's like, look, Saul was going to die anyway. Is this right? Is David right? Is God on David's side in this situation? Was it right for David to have the young man killed? The Bible doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us God's opinion on this. It doesn't speak to the right and wrong of this situation. It simply records the history. And this is something that we're going to see again and again. There's going to be other occasions, especially in the book of 2 Samuel, where you're like, but wait, is that right? In the Old Testament, you'll encounter other instances where history is recorded, but no statement about the morality of the situation is included, or God's opinion on the matter isn't included, right? So just keep that in mind. I think a lot of times we always are asking, is it right? Is it wrong? Sometimes it's just a record of history and what happened in the nation of Israel and the surrounding nations. So that's important. You'll need that information again because you'll probably have other questions about some other things that happen. So just keep that in mind. Okay, well, I'm sure we're over 5 minutes, but that is our introduction to 2 Samuel, and I'm excited to work through the book with you. Lord willing, we'll do one video every day. If I remember right, there are 24 chapters in 2 Samuel. I'm about halfway through the book currently, but thanks for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow for 2 Samuel chapter 2.